So, you want to buy a sports team, not a jersey, not a season ticket, the team itself, the stadium, the players, the broadcast deal, the logo on the merchandise that a million strangers wear to work on Monday morning. Here's the number that should stop you before you start. 2 weeks ago, the Seattle Seahawks sold for $9.6 billion. That is the highest price ever paid for a sports team on Earth. $9.6 billion. For a football franchise that was bought in 1997 for less than $200 million. That is a return of somewhere around 4,800%. And here's the part that makes this entire industry different from any other business you will ever look at. The Seahawks did not have to be good. They did not have to win a single game. They did not have to sell out a single weekend. The asset appreciates regardless. An NFL team is not a business that can fail. It is a membership to a club that only has 32 seats, and the club itself gets richer every single year, whether you do anything or not. That is the product. Not football, not entertainment. A guaranteed, appreciating, loss-proof asset that governments will build you a stadium for, and fans will never stop funding. Let's start with the entry price. If you want an NFL team, here is what the last few sales tell you. In 2018, David Tepper bought the Carolina Panthers for $2.275 billion. In 2022, the Walton family bought the Denver Broncos for $4.65 billion. In 2023, Josh Harris bought the Washington Commanders for $6.05 billion. And in July 2026, the Kosla family bought the Seahawks for $9.612 billion. That is a clean line going in one direction. Every sale sets a new record. Every buyer pays more than the last one, and every seller walks away having multiplied whatever they originally paid by a factor so large it looks like a typo. The Carolina Panthers were bought in 1993 for $206 million. They sold 25 years later for $2.275 billion. The Denver Broncos were bought in 1984 for $70 million. They sold for $4.65 billion. And the Commanders? Dan Snyder bought them in 1999 for $800 million. He sold them for $6.05 billion. On the same day, he was fined $60 million by the league for sexually harassing a team employee and hiding $11 million in revenue from the other owners. He still made $5.2 billion on the deal. That is the business model. Not revenue, not trophies, not even competence. Appreciation. So why does the asset only go up? Here is the mechanism, and once you understand it, you will never look at professional sports the same way again. The NFL operates on a principle its own insiders have called socialism for billionaires. Every year, the league collects revenue from television contracts, streaming deals, licensing, sponsorships, and merchandise. That money goes into a single national pool, and then the pool is split 32 ways, equally. In the 2025 season, each NFL team received more than $450 million from that pool alone. That is before a single ticket was sold, before a single beer was poured, before a single fan walked through a single gate. $450 million deposited into every owner's account just for being a member. The Green Bay Packers play in a city of about 100,000 people. The Dallas Cowboys play in a metro area of nearly 8 million. They both received the same check. That is the system. And we only know this because of the Packers. They are the only publicly owned team in the NFL, which means they are the only franchise legally required to disclose their finances. Every year they publish a financial statement, and every year that statement becomes the only window the public has into how much money this league actually moves. In 2024, the Packers reported total revenue of $719 million. $432 million of that was their share of the national pool. The rest, $286 million, was local revenue, the money the league does not redistribute. Multiply that national share by 32, and you get roughly $14 billion flowing through a single league in a single year, before any team sells a single hot dog. And it is funded almost entirely by media rights. The NFL's current television and streaming deals are worth a combined $110 billion over their term. That single revenue source covers close to 70% of every team's operating costs, which means even the worst franchise in the league, in the smallest market, with the emptiest stadium, is profitable before it opens the doors. Now add the local revenue on top. Ticket sales, stadium naming rights, luxury suites, parking, concessions. Those stay with the individual team. A franchise in a major market might add another 200 to 300 million on top of the national share. So, an NFL team in a decent market is pulling in somewhere between $650 and $750 million a year. Operating costs, including player salaries under the salary cap, sit somewhere around 350 to 400 million, which means an average NFL franchise is generating somewhere around 200 to 300 million a year in operating profit. And here is the kicker. None of that accounts for the appreciation of the asset itself. Forbes valued the average NFL franchise at roughly $7.1 billion in 2025. The league's least valuable team, the Cincinnati Bengals, was valued at $5.5 billion. In 2020, the average was $3.48 billion. That is a doubling in 5 years. You are collecting $200 million a year in operating profit while sitting on an asset that is gaining $1 billion in value every 12 months. There is no other asset class on Earth that does both of those things simultaneously while also being legally protected from competition by an antitrust exemption. Now let's cross the Atlantic, because the Premier League runs on the exact same drug but distributes it very differently. The Premier League generates around £3.8 billion per season from broadcast rights alone, domestic and international combined. That is more than any other football league on Earth, and the gap is not close. The US deal with NBC alone is worth roughly €450 million per year. One country, one broadcaster, more than the entire global rights package for Serie A or the Bundesliga. But unlike the NFL, the Premier League does not split the money equally. 50% of domestic broadcast revenue is shared equally among all 20 clubs. 25% is distributed based on where you finish in the table, with the champion receiving the most and the bottom club the least. And the remaining 25% is a facility fee, paid per televised match. This means the gap between first and last in any given season is roughly £73 million. Win the league and you take home significantly more than the club that finished 20th. In the NFL, that gap does not exist. You get the same check whether you win the Super Bowl or go 0-17. And this creates a completely different ownership incentive. In the NFL, winning is nice but optional. Your revenue is guaranteed. In the Premier League, losing can cost you your place in the league entirely, because relegation exists. If you finish in the bottom 3, you are dropped to the Championship, the second tier, where your broadcast revenue collapses, your best players leave, and your entire business model falls off a cliff. Except it doesn't. Not entirely, because the league has a system called parachute payments. If your club drops out of the top division, the Premier League continues to pay you, on a declining scale, for up to 3 years. In recent cycles, a relegated club received somewhere around £44 million in its first year in the Championship, then roughly 36 million, then roughly 16 million. That is more revenue than most championship clubs generate from their own operations. So even failure is subsidized. Not as generously as in the NFL, but enough that a Premier League club almost never dies from relegation. It just gets poorer, temporarily, and then usually spends its way back up using parachute money that its championship rivals do not have. Now here is the entry price. Roman Abramovich bought Chelsea in 2003 for £140 million. He poured in roughly $1.8 billion in loans and investment over 19 years. He won 21 trophies. And in 2022, he was forced to sell the club under government sanctions following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The British government froze his assets and required that he could not profit from the sale. The club sold for £2.5 billion. Roughly $4.25 billion in total committed value when you include the investment pledged by the new ownership group. 250 initial bidders, 12 credible bids, 3 finalists, 90 days start to finish. The most expensive sports transaction on earth at that time. And Abramovich received none of it. The proceeds went into a frozen account designated for humanitarian purposes in Ukraine. He spent $140 million to buy it, invested another $1.8 billion, watched it multiply, and then had it taken away by a government that had the legal power to do exactly that. That is the risk nobody prices into a Premier League club. There is no salary cap. There is no revenue-sharing floor. There is no collective ownership protection. You can win 5 league titles and 2 Champions Leagues and still lose the asset to a geopolitical event that has nothing to do with football. The NFL will never let that happen to one of its owners. The league vets buyers on entry and protects them once they're in. The Premier League does not. You are a private investor in a sovereign country's most visible cultural export, and sovereignty, as Abramovich found out, is not negotiable. Now let's talk about where the money comes from that you didn't earn. Because this is the section that should make you angry whether you care about sports or not. Since the year 2000, American taxpayers have spent more than $43 billion building professional sports stadiums. That is not a league number. That is a public number. Money taken from state budgets, county taxes, and municipal bonds, and handed to billionaire team owners who could have paid for it themselves. Of the 30 stadiums that currently host NFL franchises, only 3 were built entirely with private money. SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, Gillette Stadium in Massachusetts. Every other one received taxpayer subsidies. The mechanism works like this. An NFL owner tells his city he needs a new stadium. If the city says no, he threatens to move the team. The city, terrified of losing the cultural and political identity that comes with having a professional franchise, agrees to fund part or all of the construction using public bonds. The stadium is built. The owner keeps the naming rights revenue, the luxury suite revenue, the concession revenue, and the parking revenue. The taxpayers keep the debt. The Tennessee Titans' new stadium received roughly $1.26 billion in public funding, the most ever for an NFL venue. The Buffalo Bills' new stadium received over $1 billion in public money. The Bills' owner, Terry Pegula, is worth an estimated $9.3 billion. He was photographed on a $100 million yacht the same month the public subsidy was announced. And if you think this is an American problem, it is not. It is an American tradition. But the economics work the same way in Canada, in Australia, anywhere a government believes losing a franchise is worse than paying for one. The threat is always the same. Build me a stadium, or I'll find a city that will. Researchers at the Brookings Institution and the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis have studied this for decades. Their conclusion is consistent and clear. Stadium subsidies do not generate the economic growth that cities are promised. The jobs are temporary. The spending is displaced from other local businesses. The long-term returns to taxpayers are negligible or negative. The billionaires know this. The economists know this. The cities keep paying anyway. Because the alternative, losing the team, is politically unsurvivable for the mayor who lets it happen.
So let's run the final numbers. What do you actually get?
Scenario 1. You buy an NFL team. The entry price, based on the Seahawks sale, is somewhere north of $9 billion. But you don't need $9 billion in cash. NFL rules allow ownership groups, and in 2024 the league opened the door to institutional investors for the first time, which means private equity money can now enter the league. Once you're in, you receive over $450 million a year in shared national revenue before you sell a single ticket. Your operating profit, in a decent market, is $200 to $300 million a year. And the asset itself is appreciating at roughly 15 to 20% annually based on the last 5 years of valuations. You cannot be relegated, you cannot lose your broadcast deal, you cannot be outspent by a rival because the salary cap prevents it. The worst thing that can happen to you is that your team loses every game and your fans get angry. Your check from the league arrives regardless. Scenario 2. You buy a Premier League club. Entry price for a top 6 club is now somewhere around £3 to £5 billion based on Chelsea and recent valuations. For a mid-table club, call it $1 to $2 billion. You receive a share of the broadcast pool, distributed partly on merit, partly equally. If you finish in the top half, you are very profitable. If you get relegated, parachute payments give you a 3-year runway to come back. But there is no salary cap, which means you can be outspent. There is no antitrust exemption, which means regulators can intervene. And there is no protection against the asset being frozen, seized, or devalued by government action, as Abramovich discovered. The upside is the global audience. The Premier League is watched in more than 200 territories. A mid-table English club has more international recognition than most NFL franchises. And the broadcast revenue is still growing, particularly internationally. But here is the honest comparison. An NFL owner is a member of a cartel that guarantees his wealth. A Premier League owner is a private investor in a competitive market that can punish him for losing. In the NFL, you are protected. In the Premier League, you are exposed. Both assets appreciate, only one of them is failure-proof. So here is the final line. A sports team is not a business. It is a toll booth on human emotion. The fans pay. The taxpayers pay. The broadcast viewers pay. The advertisers pay. And the owner collects, whether the team wins or loses, whether the stadium is full or empty, whether the owner is competent or disgraced. Dan Snyder ran the Washington Commanders for 24 years. Under his ownership, the team compiled a record of 164 wins and 220 losses. 15 women accused his executives of sexual harassment. He was investigated by Congress. He was found to have hidden revenue from his own league. He was fined $60 million on the day he sold the team. He still walked away with $5.2 billion more than he paid. That is the economics of owning a sports team. The only investment on earth where the worse you are at your job, the more expensive the proof becomes that you were never needed in the first place.